Hi, and welcome to another edition of That'sJustSmart.com. Today our guest is Jay Block. Jay, can you please tell our listeners and our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am Jay Block, Sandoval County Commissioner, District 2. I'm originally from New Hampshire, went to school at North Dakota State. You were a University of North Dakota grad, so for you and I to sit here and have a friendly talk, it's surprising.
We'll be sure to send that to both of our alumni just for record keeping.
After I got my degree from North Dakota State, I went into the Air Force for 21 years, retired as a lieutenant colonel. I was a nuclear weapons guy. I had a tour in Afghanistan. I moved here in New Mexico in July of 15 from Germany. Retired from the Air Force in 2016. Ran for office and worked in private industry as a nuclear consultant.
And you have some children and a family as well?
I do. I've been married to my wife Kelly. She's from Minnesota. We have 3 kids. Madison is a University of New Mexico grad. She unfortunately left the state to move back east for better opportunities. My son Tyler is 18. He is in Austin, Texas, going to school. And then we have one left at home, Kennedy, and we named him after presidents, Madison Tyler Kennedy. She's a junior at Rio Rancho High School and a basketball player, and we're down to 1.
And if you have a chance to follow Jay Block on social media, he has wonderful, adorable cats that give him quite the adventure in the spare time that he does have.
I'm a huge cat guy, yes. So I guess that's public now. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to talk about some of the legislation that's pending up at the New Mexico State Legislature. Let's start with House Bill 85. That is a bill that is dealing with the right to work issue that New Mexico is currently involved in, and actually quite in a very forward-thinking momentum right now. Can you describe for our audience your involvement with right to work, and then we'll talk about this bill specifically?
Sure. So when I was running for office in 2016, my process is very data-driven. So I was looking at different metrics here in New Mexico, and I was comparing New Mexico with our neighbors of Arizona, Utah, Oklahoma, Texas, and Colorado. And I was curious why New Mexico was an island of poverty when you compare us to our neighbors. Our neighbors had lower child poverty, lower poverty rates as a whole, lower unemployment, higher wages. They had Fortune 500 companies in their states. We had none of that. Instead, we have high crime, highest high school dropout rate, highest poverty rate, one of the highest unemployment rates, low wages, and we're continually at the bottom when it comes to places to live and places to raise families. Mm-hmm. So when you look at those indicators, one of the things our neighbors have that we don't is right to work. And so I campaigned on that. And I sponsored that in June I brought it up publicly in June of 17 when I was in office for 6 months. I worked with Dave Heil, a fellow county commissioner, and we worked with Chamber of Commerce people. We worked with the New Mexico Business Coalition. We worked with business leaders, business owners, and we wanted to figure out if this was the right thing to do to New Mexico by looking at all the data. And the data showed us overwhelmingly that right to work will get you on the map with site selectors out there. And that's the only reason we wanted to do it. The other issue with right to work here in New Mexico, and I wish the Roundhouse would talk about this, is lack of infrastructure to attract these companies. They're just not coming here because there's no infrastructure as well. So if you can have right to work as a foundation in the state of New Mexico, and you have infrastructure on top of that, we will be a very attractive place for companies to come here. And the reason why is when you look at what I call the economic corridor in New Mexico from Los Alamos National Lab down to White Sands, between those 2 points we have 3 incredible universities with State, UNM, and New Mexico Tech, which is one of the best engineering schools in the country. Very, very good school. And then we have Sandia National Lab, we have Kirtland Air Force Base, you have Holloman Air Force Base near White Sands as well. So you look at all that expertise in the tech field, in the engineering field, and then you're like, well, why can't we exploit that and have companies come here? And we have all this land, for Sandoval County centric, we have all this land on the west side of Rio Rancho that we can zone for commercial and manufacturing and tech use. let's provide businesses incentives to come here and hire our people.
Now, can you just describe very briefly as what right to work means for our audience?
Sure. Basically, all we're saying that if you want to work at Company A, and Company A is unionized, which is fine, we don't really care if it's unionized or not. All we care about is you have the freedom to choose to join a union or not. That's it. When we look at other right to work states around the country, it's interesting. Union membership increases in right to work states. It's actually decreasing in non-right to work states. The reason why is union leaders are marketing their services to potential employees about the benefits of the union. And we have no issue with that at all. We favor that. I have no problem with anybody joining a union. What we have a problem with is being forced into a union that you may not agree with as a condition of employment. That's it.
Now, you've actually traveled around New Mexico and talked to several counties, not just Sandoval County, which is your home base, about the right to work being an option or allowing people to have that choice. Is that correct?
Yes, we have 10 counties now out of 33. Basically, a third of the state is now right to work. And it's not just a Republican issue. McKinley County just passed it. They have 3 Democrats on their county commission, and they passed it. And when you look at where McKinley County is in relation to Arizona, in the county seat of Gallup, it's right on I-40, it's right on the Arizona border. They have a rail line right there. They have a lot of land there. They could easily pull a lot of jobs and attract a lot of companies to come there. So we're making gains across the state with right to work. And unfortunately now you have Representative Damon Eli, who takes a ton of union money, who is trying to kill right to work.
And that kind of is a great segue into House Bill 85. All of the bills, and references that I'll make in today's session will be available on our website, so you can go and read what I'm referring to. But House Bill 85 basically says under Section 1, Subpart A, that it's enacted under the state's limited authority of Section 14B of the National Labor Relations Act. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that before we get back to Mr. Block. There's actually 2 major federal laws that govern union and right to work type of regulations. One is the National Labor Relations Act, which is referenced here in House Bill 85. The other is the Taft-Hartley Act. If you actually look at Section 14B of the National Labor Relations Act, it just says that a state cannot require union membership as a condition of employment. There's no authority in that section of the statute as referenced in House Bill 85. The other act that I mentioned, the Taft-Hartley Act, that Section 14B does allow states to enact right to work legislation. But that is not what House Bill 85 actually is. What House Bill 85 says, and if you pull it on the website, you'll see in Section C and D that it has now changed both the Taft-Hartley Act and the National Labor Relations Act to where the state of New Mexico has the exclusive jurisdiction to regulate either or encourage or prohibit or negotiate or execute any union agreements throughout the state. That's Section C. Section D, then, all of the counties that Mr. Block referenced are now going to be prohibited from adopting these laws or any law inconsistent with the state regulation. So it's very inhibitive on counties' ability to pass the laws that they have voted to do so, as the commissioner discussed, but also the authority that the state's seeking is not the authority that they've actually been given under the federal Taft-Hartley Act or the National Labor Relations Act. Again, that information will be available on our website for reference, but I want to turn back now to Commissioner Block. And I know you're already familiar with the bill. I'm just sharing it with our audience. But a vote no on House Bill 85, would obviously be beneficial for New Mexico. Would you agree?
Absolutely. In fact, what this bill does, it eliminates the 10 counties and the 1 municipality of Ruidoso who said, we want this. The state is coming down based on out-of-state special interests to Representative Eli and others who get tens of thousands of dollars every year in donations to kill people's choice whether or not to join a union. When you look at, we used the Kentucky model here in New Mexico. Kentucky went county by county, and they had billions of dollars of investment into Kentucky after they passed right to work. That's all we're asking. here in New Mexico is we want the same opportunities that our neighbors have to get decent jobs, because right now, what the people up in the Roundhouse are doing, and the party that has dominated the state for about 90 years, they have not done a very good job, and they've kept this state and our people near the bottom. So we're just asking for something different.
And again, this bill was sponsored by Damon Eli and Andrea Romero. Are they both Democrats?
Oh, yeah.
Again, the right to work that you're supporting, and here at That's Just Smart, our view is that individuals should be able to make their own choices and their own selections or elections when it comes to things like employment. So supporting right to work would actually allow them that individual choice, wouldn't it?
It would. In fact, there was a study out there, I think it was Princeton, and they did a study on union members in right to work and non-right to work states, and they found that the union members in right to work states were happier with their union leadership than they were in non-right to work states. And that's because it goes back again to those union leaders in right to work states marketing their services, not forcing people taking $100, $200 a month out of their check every month to support an organization that they may not agree with morally.
Did they find there was better accountability for the union leaders in the right to work states than there were in non-right to work states?
What do you mean accountability?
So rather than having mandatory enrollment or participation in a union where people did not get the choice, and the union leaders can do whatever because it's required to be a member of the union in order to be employed there. If they had a right to work where people had more of a choice, was there, or have you seen that there's any indication union leaders are more effective on behalf of their constituents?
I haven't seen that. I would leave that up to the unions. That is their business to figure out who's going to be the union leader and whether or not those leaders are performing or not in their role as the leader there, that particular union. That's really not my business.
But in a right to work state, those employees would have that choice.
They would, absolutely.
Okay. This is thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
This is Johanna Cox with that'sjustsmart.com. Please check out our website, our Twitter and Instagram for information on House Bill 85 and the other laws we referenced. Thank you. Thank you and good morning. We have Commissioner Block with us, and we're talking about legislation that's currently pending up in Santa Fe. Right now we're going to talk about House Bill 51. Are you familiar with that bill, Commissioner?
Yes.
And I'm going to just give an overview of it before we ask him some questions so that you're aware of it. House Bill 51 can be found on our website, that'sjustsmart.com, also on our Twitter and Instagram accounts as well. House Bill 51 is repealing sections 30-5-1 through 30-5-3, which are portions of our criminal code. New Mexico's criminal code is found in section 30 of our statutes. Those sections 30-5-1 through 3 deal with abortions, and one of the definitions that's offered is a justified medical termination, and currently these are in the criminal code, so these will lead to different criminal activities. But it does, under these statutes, require that if a woman under the age of 18 seeks to have an abortion for a justified medical termination of a pregnancy, as referenced in the statute, it does require permission from her parents or guardians at the time, and also to be performed by a physician licensed in New Mexico. It also allows doctors in New Mexico under section 30-5-2 who, for whether it's moral or religious grounds, object to performing an abortion or a justified medical termination of a pregnancy, as the statute calls it, to refuse to do so without suffering penalties. So they can make that option, they can make that choice, and they are not going to be sued, they cannot lose their license, they cannot be subject to any sort of discipline under their regulating body or their medical board if they make such a refusal. This repeal that is being presented by Joanne Ferrari and Georgine Lewis and Linda Lopez and Deborah Armstrong and Brian Egoff will actually repeal all of those statutes. So as a result, Commissioner, that's very concerning for some of us in New Mexico. Would you agree?
I would agree. New Mexico has a large population of Catholics who are pro-life, and I'm getting quite a few emails and phone calls on this particular bill that are vehemently against it.
And what are some of your constituents saying? Why would they be against a bill like this?
They feel it's an attack, once again, with numerous things coming from the legislature, an attack on their rights, their parental rights. Because as you talked about, you don't have to have parental consent to have an abortion if you're under 18. I think a lot of parents have an issue with that. And then from a religious perspective and a moral perspective, if you do, they don't want to be forced to do something against their religious beliefs or their moral beliefs.
And if House Bill 51 were to actually pass, then what is your understanding that the ramifications could be for New Mexico?
Well, New Mexico is already considered, if we look at, well, we're in competition now with New York and Virginia with some radical late-term abortion bills or infanticide. I think New Mexico, for whatever reason, is being run by this anti-life agenda that's competing now with Virginia and New York. And a lot of people are very upset about this. I think when we heard the governor's comments of Virginia about making the baby as comfortable as possible, but then letting it die, that goes against the moral fiber of the vast majority of people in this state.
Now, for the sake of our audience, do you know what time frame or how many weeks gestation is considered a late-term abortion in New Mexico right now?
I believe it's 24 to 26.
24 to 26 weeks?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any doctors who are constituents?
I do. I have several doctors that are constituents, and I have heard from one particular gentleman who is, based on his religious beliefs and his medical opinion, he's fighting hard against this bill.
And why would a doctor be opposed to House Bill 51?
Well, so obviously his religious beliefs is his priority, but the other piece that you touched on in this bill is it forces him to do this procedure. And if he doesn't do this procedure, there could be discipline actions taken against him where he could lose his license. And the state forces him to do something against his own moral beliefs and religious beliefs.
Now, there are different reasons that maybe some sort of an abortion, or as it's mentioned here, a justified medical termination of a pregnancy might be justified. I am not a medical doctor, so I would not be qualified to make such a determination, and I'm not going to ask you if you are.
I am not, yeah.
But my understanding is there are several, already statutes in place for surgical procedures.
Yes.
There are regulations in place for medical providers as a doctor, as well as facilities to ensure the safety of any patient receiving medical care in New Mexico. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, for the mother and the baby,
Okay.
yes.
And mothers even under the age of 18 people in general under the age of 18, typically, unless there's some other court order in place, do need to notify their parents and have some sort of consent from their parents for medical procedures as well already. Is that your understanding?
Yes, totally.
Okay, so a vote no on House Bill 51 would not be problematic for New Mexico. Would you agree?
What do you mean it would not be problematic?
Meaning we can still keep these statutory sections, 30-5-1.
Yes, to oppose the bill.
Yeah, to oppose the bill.
I agree.
So a vote opposing House Bill 51 is not a vote against New Mexico, is it?
No, absolutely not. It's a vote to keep these statutes in place, to have parents have their rights kept intact. It's so doctors and medical providers can have their own rights not attacked, whether it's their moral beliefs or their religious views.
Thank you very much for listening today. House Bill 51 will be available on our website for your reference. Please read it, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on it. Thank you. Thank you for joining us this morning. Today we're talking about legislation that's currently pending up in Santa Fe, and we're going to talk about Senate Bill 8. There are several pieces of legislation that's presented regarding our gun rights, but Senate Bill 8 seems to be gaining a lot of traction and a lot of news coverage, specifically with the recent tweet by our governor yesterday, which I'll get to in a second. Are you familiar, Commissioner, with Senate Bill 8?
I am.
Okay. And for our listeners, again, a copy of the bill will be available on our website. I encourage you to read it and think about what it is we're sharing today and call your representatives with your opinion respectively. So Senate Bill 8 basically is going to make it unlawful to sell a firearm without a background check. The exceptions to this background check will be those who currently hold a valid federal firearms license, a law enforcement agency, or law enforcement officers. So cops and federal firearms licensed dealers are the only exceptions. Anybody that's involved in the sale of a firearm is going to be required to participate in this background check, and it is a federal background check, which is regulated under 18 U.S.C. section 922N and 922G. Every party that is involved in the sale, so if I were to sell it to my son, then each of us could be charged for this very violation. Each firearm that gets sold is also a separate offense. So if I sell my son 3 firearms, then 3 firearms there would be 3 different offenses charged. And also any 2 or more offenses can be charged in the same complaint. This is going to be a misdemeanor if this bill passes, which although it is not a small charge, we have petty misdemeanors, and different felony levels in New Mexico. Misdemeanors involving a firearm can still have great implications on individuals, and we'll talk about why this is a bad bill in a little bit. But with that said, Commissioner, is that a fair summary of Senate Bill 8?
Yeah, you nailed it. Great job.
Okay. Now, would be if this were to pass, that would be a problem in New Mexico. Would you agree?
Huge problem in New Mexico. New Mexico is a pro-gun state. We have about, I think, 11 or 12 anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment bills up there right now that are catching a lot of attention around the state. And frankly, nationally, we've been hearing New Mexico in the news nationally because of what's going on in Santa Fe and what our New Mexico Sheriff's Association is doing.
Now, have the sheriffs actually come out with any position regarding Senate Bill 8 that you're aware of?
Huge. They're totally against it. We have, I believe it's 29 or 30 of 33 sheriffs around the state that are coming to different county commission meetings to advocate for a sanctuary county resolution against these bills. Sandoval County, we passed ours last Thursday. This morning we had McKinley County, again, all Democrats, support the sanctuary county status. In fact, we've had several municipalities have also supported, I believe 7, and 30 sheriffs, to include the chair of the New Mexico Sheriff's Association, Tony Mace, the Cibola sheriff, Democrat, by the way. He came out, and Tony's been going around the state advocating for these resolutions, so great job for Tony. And now, you'll get to the tweet here in a second, so now the sheriffs, our law enforcement, is getting some pretty nasty tweets directed at them from our governor.
They did, and I'm actually going to read it just to make sure I don't misquote our governor. At approximately 15:29 or 3:29 on February 26th, she tweeted the following: "I'm not daunted by obstacles, whether it's NRA propaganda, rogue sheriffs throwing a childish pity party, or bad faith critics. Legislative leaders and I will continue to fight the scourge of gun violence in our communities," specifically citing Senate Bill 8. Now, I walked you through Senate Bill 8, and I do encourage you to go to the website and please read the language. But Commissioner, would you agree there's nothing in Senate Bill 8 that she cites in her tweet that deals with gun violence?
Nothing at all.
Okay, it actually just deals with the sales.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
And I may have misstated it, please look at it, but there's nothing in here that does any sort of assessment on any different crimes that are being, evaluated or possibly decreased by this.
There's nothing in here that's going to prevent, there's nothing in this bill that is going to prevent any type of reduction in gun violence.
And in fact, you've lived in New Mexico for several years, correct?
Yes.
Over 10 years?
No, I've been in New Mexico for coming up on 4 years now.
Okay. I've been in New Mexico now for almost 13 years, and it's safe to say that some of our time has overlapped since we're both here now. Is that safe?
Yes.
All right.
I feel like I'm on the stand with you.
Sorry.
That's okay. You're a lawyer, I know.
I know. I'm a very good lawyer.
Yes.
Very good lawyer. So There's several laws already in effect that deal with gun violence in New Mexico. There's laws that deal with domestic violence. There's laws that deal with actually firearm enhancements in New Mexico. So if you commit a crime, any crime in New Mexico, and a gun is involved, you don't have to point the gun at anybody. If a gun is used in the commission of a crime, you can get what is called a firearm enhancement. There are ways the DAs can already do that, and it adds additional time to your criminal sentence. If you have any questions, please reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram or on our website, and I'll be happy to share that information with you specifically.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, because last Thursday, Sheriff Mace and our sheriff, Sheriff Jesse James Casals, both Democrats that are against this bill vehemently, and the other bills up there, they said there's 117 gun laws on the books right now, and they can't enforce some of the ones on the books right now. I mean, our law enforcement there's not a infinite amount of resources for our law enforcement. I mean, they have to prioritize what they're doing. And they have come out and said, we can't enforce some of this, and this puts law enforcement in danger with some of these red flag laws that go back to Damon Eli once again with his anti-Second Amendment bill.
And the Bernalillo County Sheriff has come out and taken a similar position as those other two sheriffs.
It was great to see Manny Gonzalez come out, again, Democrat. And the reason why Manny Gonzalez is important to me is because he leads the largest sheriff's department in the largest population center in the state with the highest crime. So if he's telling you that these are bad bills, I would really ask the governor to reconsider and listen to your sheriffs, and don't shut them out as she has done, or don't call them out by calling them names. I mean, these are sheriffs and deputies that are out there working hard for her. The state police, by the way, are working very hard for her, and they also guard her, provide her protection. So for her to lash out that way at these incredible men and women is just, I don't understand her thinking there. In fact, you'll remember in 2018, she said that she was going to be a Second Amendment governor. She talked about not limiting our rights, and she's gone back on that promise pretty quick, as well as many other promises.
So it would be safe to say a vote against Senate Bill 8, in this case requiring any sale of a firearm to have a federal background check. A vote no or a vote against it would not be a vote against New Mexico. Is that fair?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. The one thing I'd ask you to just elaborate on a little bit. So if you decide to pass along one or more firearms to your son, and there's no record of that background check transaction, and you are charged with that and convicted, how would that affect you when you're applying for a job, especially you as an attorney or your son later on in life?
You would have to list that as a conviction that you had in the past. If you are asked specifically whether or not it involved a firearm in that offense, you would have to say that it did. And in many cases, employers will not accept someone with a prior conviction, or they will count it against you if there's a firearm involved because of the stigma associated with it. And the typical firearm enhancement, like I mentioned earlier, that is already on the books and in place, that's usually what people would affiliate with that type of answer to that kind of question. Does that answer your question?
That's perfect. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Please check out again the Senate bill and any other information that we talk about on that'sjustsmart.com. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're covering different legislation that's currently pending up in Santa Fe, and now we're going to talk about Senate Bill 459 or 459. Are you familiar with that bill?
Quite.
And we'll talk a little bit about your opinions and stuff here in a second. I just want to share with our listeners and our audience what Senate Bill 459 does. A copy of this will be available on our website, or you can message me through Twitter or Instagram and get a copy as well. I encourage you to read it and think about it and understand it on your own as well. Senate Bill 459, which is currently pending, adds to the Oil and Gas Act a definition of hydraulic fracturing. Fracturing is a way that our oil and gas industry obtain resources from the ground, and I'll let our Commissioner Block talk about that a little bit more detail here in a second. but it adds the definition of hydraulic fracturing, which is where they use a fluid, they inject a fluid into an oil or natural gas bearing rock in order to pull the resources out of it. That is the additional definition that is added to that act. As you look through it, there are renumbering of it based on the addition of the new definition. But then further on in section 2 of the act, it proposes halting the issuance of all new permits allowing hydraulic fracturing for the purpose of extracting oil or natural gas. And then section 3 requires several departments to do reporting and studies on hydraulic fracturing based on the permits that are still issued at this time. So again, this is pending legislation, and because this is kind of a technical topic, can you just describe for our audience what is hydraulic fracturing or fracturing in general?
I think you nailed it. The basic definition in layman's terms is you go down a vertical well, and then you go horizontal, and then you're injecting at very high PSI fluids into these oil and gas formations, and it allows the industry to pull a lot more of the resources out of the ground, vice strict vertical wells that would have to be close together to gain access to the resources. So from a surface perspective, you're actually lowering your footprint when it comes to extracting the resources than having numerous vertical wells all over the place. We've been doing fracturing in the United States, and specifically here in New Mexico, for well over 50 years in my county as well.
And you're a commissioner in which county?
Sandoval County. So most of the fracturing, in fact all the fracturing, is in the northwest part of Sandoval County.
All the fracturing for New Mexico is?
No, not even close. The southeast part of the state obviously is leading the way, and they're the ones who are really carrying most of the water when it comes to helping our economy along, and all the money that they poured into the economy for the oil and gas industry.
So fracturing is actually done all over New Mexico and has been, I think you said, for 50 years?
I wouldn't say all over New Mexico. It's in the southeast and the northwest part of the state.
Okay, so
Yeah.
kind of those two opposite
Right,
corners.
you look at the San Juan County area, Sandoval, and then the southeast portion of the state along the Texas border.
And this industry, the oil and gas industry, has been very supportive of New Mexico as a whole. The money goes to a lot of our state programs, our budget, education, those kinds of things, correct?
When you look at, the oil and gas industry can be up and down, but lately it's been funding roughly between 33 and 40% of our general fund, which goes toward infrastructure, goes toward our schools, teacher salaries, first responders. It also dumps into our healthcare, senior centers. It hits, everyone is touched by oil and gas in this state. And without the oil and gas industry, if this bill goes through, it's going to kill the oil and gas industry in this state. And you're going to see well over 50,000 people that are employed in this state go somewhere else, and you're going to see our tax revenues drop precipitously.
Now, the lottery scholarship that New Mexico has, that receives funding also from oil and gas?
Absolutely.
Okay, and those of you that are students, if you're not familiar with the lottery scholarship, please send me a message. It's a great opportunity New Mexico offers. It's not in many states to help you get money to go to college and to help further your continuing education.
To a state school here.
To a state school here, thank you.
Yeah.
And we have some great schools here in New Mexico, NMSU, UNM, New Mexico Tech, Highland University.
Eastern.
We have a lot of really good schools here that you can use the scholarship for as well. So, are you familiar with the permit process? Because this also Senate Bill 459 halts the issuance of permits. So can you describe the permit process for
Sure.
us?
So the oil and gas industry is the most regulated industry in the United States by far. They have to go through a pretty tedious permitting process where they have to comply with various federal agencies and various state agencies. And by the way, we get the permit at the county level as well and give their permission to go drill. So it's multiple layers of government with multiple agencies of government.
Are environmental impact assessments required for these permits?
Yes.
For those of you that don't know, an environmental impact assessment is usually a study that's done by an environmental department. It's frequently done for construction, obviously in oil and gas as well, to decide or determine whether or not there will be an adverse impact to the environment where this activity is going to occur. So where a permit for this type of fracturing is going to be occurring, those environmental assessments would basically
They're
make
critical,
what?
and we don't want to get rid of those environmental assessments. The industry doesn't want to get rid of them. One of the reasons why the industry doesn't want to get rid of them is because if there is an issue, any type of pollution or an accident or incident, the industry wants to show that, hey, we complied with this. The industry also does water testing as well before they commence their drilling, because they don't want to be accused of poisoning any water as well. So the industry is very good when it comes to mitigating any type of legal exposure that could come back on them.
So there's environmental assessments. They also do, structural assessments to make sure that, nothing's gonna collapse.
Yep.
Um,
Emergency assessment, because we need to know where the well is, and our emergency responders, our fire departments have to be qualified to go out there and fight a fire or respond to an incident on site as well, so you have to have that. You have to go through the planning and zoning department as well, to make sure that all the other permits are complete and accurate.
So what sort of impact do you foresee happening to Sandoval County or New Mexico as a whole if no more additional permits are issued and Senate Bill 459 passes?
Pack up and go home.
It'd be very devastating to New Mexico.
Pack up and go home.
And where is your home?
My home is New Mexico. But seriously, I mean, you have to remember, it's not just the direct jobs in the oil and gas industry that's affected, it's also all the indirect jobs that are affected that the industry supports. I mean, you have workers that go out every day and families that go out and spend money. I mean, we all support other small businesses and other businesses with our pay. That's gonna be affected. Your schools are gonna be affected. You're gonna lose probably about 1/3 of your teachers as well. This is extremely bad for the people in New Mexico, and this bill needs to be killed.
The New Mexico Oil and Gas Association has a website, and they also have a Twitter feed where you can get a lot of information about the tests that Commissioner Block and I referenced and discussed. And you can see that even on that website, there is very few, if any, major problematic environmental concerns that seem to be discussed during these discussions on Senate Bill 459. So like Commissioner Block said, in order to get a permit, you have to get environmental assessments, safety assessments, fire assessments, just to get the permit, and you have to maintain all of those compliance regulations to keep the permit. So there's all this that's being done already to regulate it. Prohibiting the growth in this industry that New Mexico is so reliant on is a bad idea.
And you will also, I want to say too, the history of the oil and gas industry in the state of New Mexico, and the state has come down and talked to us, because we at the county have been debating this for over 3 years. I voted against an oil and gas ordinance back in November, December that banned fracking, because that is illegal. Moore County tried that, they were shot down. But when it comes to the protection of the drinking water, there's not been one instance of drinking water contaminated in the state of New Mexico, according to our state, in the history of oil and gas drilling operations here, not one.
And that's important information to remember. With the new permits, how often are permits renewed at the county level?
I'm not sure how often they're renewed. I know that the timeline for them is roughly 30 to 60 days at the county level for the various departments to look at it, for it to go through the planning and zoning department, and then to come to the planning and zoning commission, and then come to me, the county commission. But before that, it has to go through the state as well, to make sure that it's accurate and complete, and the state will make sure it complies with federal regulations as well. We don't at the county have the technical knowledge at the county level on drilling and gas operations. In order to do that, we'd have to hire, we did a little study, we'd have to hire about 4 dozen total hydrologists, petroleum engineers, environmental engineers, to really look at this more, and it adds roughly about another like $10 million a year to our budget to hire all these people on top of the regulations that the state and the federal has. So it's a lot of duplication of effort, and that's what these people want. They want a lot of duplication of effort. They want to make this process so slow where it turns the oil and gas industry away.
And that's part of, I think it's section 3 with all these additional reports and analyses and evaluations and all this.
Again, it is the most
superfluous activity.
regulated, it's the most regulated industry in the United States. And all they're trying to do is kill it by slowing it down with more bureaucratic nonsense.
So it is possible for your legislator, to vote no on Senate Bill 459 and still be supportive of New Mexico and our future development. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this to me ties into right to work, because this economy here is so dependent on oil and gas for our state, where we really need to diversify the economy. And if you don't diversify the economy, if you remember 3-4 years ago in the State House, we were having these $400 million budget shortfalls because oil and gas was so cheap. So when you have all your eggs in one basket, you're really increasing your risk to your economy and your population. And that's one of the reasons why right to work is important in this state, to diversify our economy.
And thank you, Commissioner. You have talked about right to work. Please check out our website for that episode with Commissioner Block. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for listening. Again, the information regarding Senate Bill 459 is available on our website, that'sjustsmart.com, or you can follow us on Twitter or Instagram. Thank you and have a great day.